Hey y'all, welcome back to the Decolonized Christian podcast, where we dismantle harmful theology and reimagine the Christian witness together. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about capitalism, something we all experience, we all have lived, but maybe we've never really begun to speak about how this system actually influences our faith. And we have a special guest with us for this episode, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Greg to share with us who will be joining this conversation.
All right, people. So this evening we have with us Mr. Nikolaus Knight. This is my guy. He's my colleague, teacher, activist, musician. He is someone who speaks into issues that affect people at a systemic level. We've had different conversations about how systems of oppression work and how they manifest themselves, and I thought it would be good to bring in a voice such as his to speak to this particular topic.
Greg brought this topic to me a few weeks ago, and it had me thinking about how capitalism has played itself out in my life. And I began to notice, really over this last 2 weeks, how capitalism is working with the COVID vaccine rollout. So Pfizer basically saying, here's our price. We're not going to allow people in this free market to capitalize on our research. And it just had me thinking, at what point does capitalism do more harm than good, right? I was really beginning to think about that idea, and it led me to this question: is Jesus a capitalist? So I want to throw that out to y'all. What are the first things you think about when you hear capitalism? And then do you think Jesus is a capitalist?
I know for me, the first thought that comes to my head when I think of capitalism is slavery. That's like one of the fruits of capitalism, not only the harvest of like capitalism, like the result of capitalism, but also what sustained and continues to sustain capitalism. And not the sense of like slavery in that, we've like demonized it in a way like, it's the worst thing possible that could ever happen, that ever did happen, and that we moved so far past it. But not slavery and that concept, like, beating on people and all these things, like horrible things. Slavery and the concept of free labor. Unpaid labor is what literally sustains capitalism. So like that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of capitalism. And when I think of Jesus, the first thing that comes to my mind is mutual aid, which is the opposite of capitalism. I think of the messages of take care of one another. I think of how, I fed 5,000 people, or another twist on that scripture is that 5,000 people fed each other. And Jesus was there to help facilitate that process. I think of like moments like that when Jesus heals the sick and doesn't ask for insurance back pay or copay. I'm thinking of like, like I think of Jesus in that light. And so contextually, like putting Jesus, I don't think that Jesus was in a system of like modern capitalism, right? Of course not. I do think that there was a form of imperialism that existed at that time, and Jesus was in direct opposition of that. And I think that if Jesus was to look at the American empire, Jesus would be still direct opposition of that imperial sense of putting people down so that you yourself can be propped up. I think that the same way he dealt with the Romans is the same way he would deal with America, and America would also react the same way that the Romans did with murder. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's important, like Nick just did, to make the statement, make it known that we realize that modern day capitalism is not what we're talking about in relation to what existed in the time of Jesus. Because people like to play semantics games, and it just becomes like, just it's unimportant when you talk about the effects of capitalism. And so for me, when I think about that, I'm thinking if Jesus were physically walking the earth today, do we feel like he would speak in support or back this system or its principles that uphold it?
Yeah. The main scripture I hear for people who are deeply in love with our nation and who are deeply in love with capitalism is Mark 12:17, give to Caesar what is Caesar and give to God what is God. And I've seen that worked out, and it's like, hey, here's capitalism, just do it. And then church, my faith, is something separate. But for people of color, it means something very different. And so I really want to share our boy, Greg, Gustavo Gutierrez, what he says about this. He says, in the Pharisees' question, there's a possible thought of not paying their tax and those that are keeping money for themselves. So their nationalism doesn't go any further than that. And Jesus immediately responds to the root of that, saying it is necessary to eradicate all dependency on money. It's not a question of breaking with the political climate of the empire, but it's a question of breaking away from the oppression that comes from participating in that system. That's why Jesus tells them to give the coin back to Caesar. It has his image on it. Give it back. You have no need for that, right? I think that's a radical response to, who do I owe taxes to, right? And Jesus goes immediately for the heart and says, I know this guy's image is on it, and we're going to dismantle it. Yes, you have to live within it, but it's oppressive, and you don't need it. So render to the empire what is the empire's, and we still got work to do. We are not satisfied. We're not sitting there being like, okay, well, I'm going to have, this set aside for this, and then how can I, gain interest on my... No. Give it up, give it away. We got work to do. And so I am going to share with y'all the general principles of capitalism, and please feel free to add on to these. And so from our experiences, I think these will hit home. So the first one is private property. That is, people are allowed to own tangible assets, right? Like property. We're going to talk about black wealth here. We've been told how to accrue black wealth. The fastest way is through land ownership, right? So in capitalism, we're free to own the assets that we so desire. The next one is self-interest. So through this, people act in pursuit of their own good. So it's no longer about my neighbor, right? It's about my own self-interest in what I can gain from it, from this system. And the next one is the market competes. So people compete, companies compete for my time, my attention, for my dollar. That is all marketing marketing is people competing for your dollars. And, the more competition, the better it is for the consumer. The next one is freedom to choose. I get to choose how to spend my capital, where to invest my capital. I get to say, in most cases, where my money goes. I'm sure we'll touch on student loan debt maybe. But in the system of capitalism, I get to tell where I get to tell my money where it should go. And then the last one is a limited role in government. So in capitalism, government shouldn't be in the pockets of people, right? It's the foundational belief that I, as a private citizen who own land, who I can choose where to spend my money, the market should compete. I have my own self-interest. That means I have rights, and those rights shouldn't be trampled on by the government. And those are kind of the basic tenets of capitalism. And I want to put those down for a second and ask y'all, do you have any thoughts around just basic tenets of capitalism that you've heard?
Yeah, I think I've heard pretty much all of those things. It's just basically like the biggest defense of it is like we live in a free market, and people have the freedom to do these things with their capital. Those are, I mean, like I understand like the premise, the theory of capitalism. Also with the competition piece in theory, the way competition is supposed to go in the theory of capitalism is that a business rises to the top off of hard work, or someone rises to the top based off of hard work and accumulating capital. And if that person goes off their game in competition, like somebody competes better than them, then that person is knocked off the top, and then another thing rises up to the top. That's in theory, right? Because in practice, It looks a lot differently. And one thing that I think is really interesting when I'm listening to folks talk about what capitalism actually is, it's the way people talk about capital. It's the way people talk about property. I find that really interesting, especially in the United States, when folks talk about property and capital and don't mention the fact that Black people are that property and that capital that people want the right to own.
Yep.
Like that's like, and that's literally the bottom line. There's no there's nothing more than that. Like that's literally the function of prisons. That's literally the function of prisons. There are companies that invest into prisons so that they can benefit from free labor. That's slavery. And that's what's sustaining capitalism. This nation became, because it's private property. It is like the Black people, right? And so and that, I think when we talk about Black wealth and we talk about liberation through Black capitalism, it's always interesting to that we would believe that a system that has used us as property, that does not view us as human, but it views us as property. We can never be human in in a space where we are considered property. I think it's interesting that we believe that we can replicate this system that is literally defined us as property, as a means to being free. But those are some initial thoughts that I have about it. But that Black people are this property and this capital that sustains capitalism. And when we talk about America, becoming as prosperous as a nation as it is, we know why that is. There's no secret. Right. We know why that is. The property and the labor and the hard work, all of those things came off of the backs of your property, of what you decided was your property, through so many tortures and sinister means.
Greg, you're shaking his head. I want to throw that out to you as well, in terms of those tenets of capitalism.
I ain't got nothing to say. Nick said,
Nick done covered it all. We might as well sign off.
We can end this whole thing. But just to, I guess, a follow-up, the general idea that property is more important of a concept than honoring people. And when we have, to me, that is honestly how I've always understood capitalism. I have not known, it's a new thought for me, discovering the symbiotic relationship between racism and capitalism. That's a new idea for me. But I've always known that it was about profit. That was the main thing. Not people, not honoring people and putting people first. So in that regard, I think that's problematic off top. Like on its face, that's an issue. But when you get into how it interlocks with other things that oppress people, then it becomes even a bigger problem.
You just triggered something in my mind I just got a revelation while you were talking, and that I think I said that wrong, and that Black people are the property and the capital. But now I'm looking back at it and thinking about what happened over the summer, what happened in my own experiences in the streets. Black people are actually deemed worth less than property. When we think about the fact that it's more important that we save the window on this cop car than we care about this black life that just got murdered brutally. Or do you care about, the cops that are using literally war crimes on citizens in order to keep them in check? Like, we're more worried about the windows and the businesses, like the doors, the Target, the Wendy's. I don't know who's listening, but like, we have this phrase in the movement that would say F that Wendy's, F that Target. Because, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's none of this is real. And that's kind of the bottom line for me, that I think that I got from the message of Jesus when he says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto God what is God's, because this money stuff ain't it. Like, it's not real. Because in the same breath, like in the same book, it says, bring ye all the tithes to the storehouse. It doesn't say so that there may be money in my house, so there may be meat in mine house. And so even then he's decentering money, the concept of money. And I think that's a little shaky for a lot of preachers who want to center tithes around money versus centering tithes around time, around energy, around what we do for each other to keep each other okay. My mom preaches about that a lot in regard to what it looks like to tithe to a church, or to tithe and like whatever type of organization you're in, what mutual aid actually looks like, and not centering money in that, because money as a concept is literally not real. It is made up. And thus like drives everything. So when people say things like, I should have the right to use my capital in these ways, what are you really saying? Why is water a natural resource that was given by the universe, by God, on its own? Why is water privatized? Why do we live in a system that gets to decide who has access to clean water? The same water that's existed since the beginning of time.
Nick, while you were talking, I was just thinking about a wall getting more justice than Breonna Taylor, and that Flint still doesn't have water. That's capitalism through and through. And when bringing it into a theological perspective, it's this bottom line theology that says if it's not good for the economic gain, then we're just going to put it to the side. So I think COVID has really shown us like physical buildings and the physical body of Christ. It's there, but buildings are almost pointless. And it's like, I think churches have been really struggling with how do I actually engage my church body in doing church when I don't have access to this building? And I can't help but think of this bottom line theology that says, I'd rather sow seeds into my budget to be more prosperous so we can build more churches, we can get better lights, we can get better pews, but better chairs and all these things, while in yet choosing profit over people. And
Decolonized church.
Right. Oh, brother, that's the next episode. I mean, seriously, when we think about just our theological tendencies within capitalism, it's very much like, does this make sense for us financially? Like, I hear that conversation time and time and time again, where I just kind of wonder what the question is on the other side. And like Nick said, it may be something to the effect of, what does mutual aid look like in the midst of this context? In our community, what does this actually look like? And I think once we begin to shift away from self-interest, I think people slickly say, well, that's communism. Like, they're so quick to say, oh, you want to share resources and give resources to people who haven't earned it yet, or healthcare is not a human. Like, it's crazy to me that you have to work to get healthcare, like the basic cover, like healthcare. You have to be employable to receive
insane.
Care. That to me is downright simple.
That's insane.
Yeah, this is why there's a concept called abolition that has existed since the days of slavery, well, since the beginning of time, the concept. But the language for it has existed since slavery. And and the idea of abolition is, there are not enough incremental changes that we can make that will get us to where we need to be. The incremental changes will regress, and progression over time is not real. Dr. King says this in the I Have a Dream speech, the one that gets omitted, the part that gets omitted. They start at, black children and white children gonna get together and hold hands and sing kumbaya. No, there's a part at the beginning of the speech where, one, he says we're coming to get our check, and then two, he says we must not be we must not, we must not be confused or something, like derailed by the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. What I think he was describing in that was reform. What does that look like in our days? That looks like that we just got to get Trump out for now, and then we can worry about everything else later. Yeah, so like those are the little incremental changes. Once we get Trump out, like once we get Biden in, then like over time, like little things, like we can't ask Biden for much right now because, just like one little small step at a time. And then eventually later down the road, we shall overcome someday, one day. Oh yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Be byproduct. And I think that Biden is just a diet, a diet Trump. Like, I think the administration is the exact same, right? Because I think that, like, when we looked at what happened over the summer, because this is the idea of abolition, and that like one thing comes down so that something else can come up, which sounds a lot like what capitalism was supposed to be. But literally, like we, burn down the property, burn down all the things, like the walls, the systems, the all the things, right? So that we can build up a new world. So that, like, I think that I forgot what made me trigger, what you said that triggered this, but yeah, it's like when I think of budgets, like we keep asking for more money for education, we keep asking for more money for healthcare, and then we always get met with the question, where does that money come from? In reality, the money is there. It's being spent on tax write-offs for the rich. It's being spent on police that, by statistical data, are doing nothing. It's being spent on the military, right? That we are spending taxpayer money on the military, rendering unto Caesar for a military during a pandemic when nobody's fighting wars. When I first saw the question, I think Greg posted it on Facebook, I was a little nice on that. And I tried to present it in a language that could be understanding to folks who weren't ready to hear like a more clear truth, which is that, the question isn't, for me, is Jesus a capitalist? The statement is that Jesus is a communist. That I can stand firm and believe in that based off of literally the scripture and the stories. Like it's plain as day. Like he didn't say, if you love me, find my sheep a job so that they can work hard enough and earn enough money to eat. He said, if you love me, feed my sheep. Point blank. and not only that, like also went up against the structure. So like I think that like what happens a lot of times in Christianity is we move towards this nonprofit approach of philanthropy, like, we're doing these good things, and and if more of us do these good things, eventually poverty will decline, and people will have more things, as long as the individual ones of us, the individual organizations, the individual churches, the individual ministries, as long as we do these little community events that are so cute, we put, take pictures, all those things, that eventually we will, that eventually poverty will be a something that's solved. It's a thing that my principal, Brian Ingram at our school, likes to call putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds. It's literally that. Because like the other piece of it is that, like, I think that there's a book that mentions this, that says that the ministry of Jesus was not just to comfort the afflicted, but also to afflict the comfortable. And Also, I think when we think of the individualized side of capitalism, we've been conditioned to believe that what we experience in our lives, the hardships or the good things that we experience in our lives, are due to the individual decisions, are due to like all of these things are the impact of my individual decisions, versus what the scripture says, which is that there's a broader context, there's a broader system, right? Like, people aren't still getting sick in America because people are going out. People are still getting sick in America because our healthcare system sucks. And because the healthcare system decides who gets to have access to it. And like, the healthcare system is right now deciding who gets access to this vaccine. And they're trying to send teachers back into school without giving us that. Like, I think that like, so like the scripture, going back to what the scripture says, the scripture even says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. A lot of times we try to bring this racism, patriarchy-ism fight here when the fight is actually here. And I'm like putting my hands vertically right now. Like, the fight is vertically, like vertical, and not like so much horizontal. It's not with each other. It's with the systems that we find ourselves in that context. So I think that that's one thing that like we lose when we, and that's a capitalist idea that, individuals, so like with COVID and with racism, it's like, if more white people are nice, then all of a sudden racism will disappear. No, racism is actually attached to capitalism, like intrinsically linked to capitalism, as well as patriarchy, as well as all the other isms, homophobia, transphobia, fat phobia, ableism, all those things. It's linked. And until all of them come down, we will still continually perpetuate these systems. Like, every last wall of Jericho has to fall.
My God.
I think we've seen over the last 30 to 40 years that trickle-down economics does not work. It doesn't work.
I have to push back. It does.
Does it?
Works, right? Yes, it does. It absolutely, it works exactly the way it's supposed to work for the people that it's supposed to serve.
Gotcha.
And that's the other thing. Like, I don't believe in capitalism as this evil thing in the sense of like, or even white supremacy. I don't see like folks who are taking advantage of the system to do what it's going to do, which is serve their interests. I don't see that as an evil thing. I think that it's just people invested in their own interests. And there are people who choose to divest from those interests, which requires a sacrifice. And that's what solidarity actually really is. That's why allyship, co-conspirating, that's what that really is when you choose to take your privilege and to sacrifice that joint for the interest of those who are not like you. I think, but like when it comes to trickle down economics, yes, it absolutely works because the things doesn't trickle down far enough for anybody to lose money at the top. Like, they absolutely works for them. Like, slavery worked for the slave master.
Great semantic and nuance. Let's shift the direction toward Black wealth. This is a topic that I haven't really done a whole lot of study in. And I think it's because I don't see it very often. I haven't experienced or been in spaces where Black wealth was specifically talked about, which is a problem in and of itself, right? But let's talk about Black wealth, what it is. Nick, I would love for you to kind of guide our thinking around Black wealth, what it is, how it operates, and what the end goal is.
Yeah. If you ever heard anybody on social media speak of Jay-Z brunch, speak of Nipsey Hussle, speak of buy back the block, invest more into Black businesses, those types of things. A lot of times, the response to those with leftist politics is, well, we need to play chess, not checkers. We need to You need to, invest more into capitalism. And if more Black people invest in capitalism and benefit from Black capitalism, eventually Black people will be free. It's absolutely the trickle down economics thing. It's the idea that when Obama was elected, that everybody was made free. The idea that racism cannot exist as long as there is a Beyonce, right? Like this idea, that's Black capitalism. It's like it's a reflection of like actual capitalism. Funny enough, still exists within the context of white supremacist capitalism.
Right.
Like it's still there, right? So like it's so it's inside of it's a bubble within another bubble. I think that it does present like there are some fallacies within the entire like concept of Black capitalism. I do know that like the push that idea is not new. So I did see in your notes, you talked about Black Wall Street. We saw what happened with Black Wall Street. It got burned down, but not only did it get burned down, but even in Black Wall Street, it gets romanticized a lot because there were people living in poverty while Black Wall Street was going on. Black Wall Street didn't save every Black person.
Right.
And I know that like Fred Hampton, I think his birthday is recent, and he's gonna be in the movie that's coming out soon. Well, they're making a movie about him. Fred Hampton actually, he made a quote that said like, we're not going to fight racism with racism. We're going to fight fire with water. So we're not going to fight, hate with hate. We're going to fight hate with love. We're not going to fight racism with racism. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. We're not going to fight capitalism with Black capitalism, but we're going to fight capitalism with socialism. Like we're not going to, you can't call yourself in direct opposition of a system without actually being in direct opposition of the system.
Ooh, you better say that again. You better say that again. Say it again. Come on.
Yeah.
Come
so
on.
you can't call yourself being in direct opposition of a system without actually being in direct opposition of said system. You can't so you can't call yourself not invested in racism if you're not accountable to Black people or people that are not like you. And you also, okay, I'm gonna be honest, you can't even call yourself, I'm gonna take it here, Greg. You can't call yourself somebody who is against anti-Blackness, but your anti-Blackness shows up anytime it's a conversation about Black women and girls, i.e. the Gorilla Glue girl.
Talk about it.
Like,
Talk about it.
It's you know what I'm saying? Like you don't get to pick and choose that, right? Like, and Jesus makes that point very plain and clear in his walk. So yeah, I think that's I don't know why I got into that tangent, but
no, it's good.
That's the entire concept of Black capitalism is this idea that is used to prop up certain individuals, and then if many more certain individuals get propped up, then eventually all of us are going to be free, without the historical context that there were Black slave masters in the time of slavery.
Yeah.
And that still did not save.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's just trying to work within the system to eventually tear up in the system. And that's very, very hard to do. As you were talking, Nick, I was just thinking about existing in a world where I need capitalism to feed my family, but and yet my behaviors should reflect that I'm moving in a different direction, right? I'm rendering to Caesar what is Caesar, but I'm going to seek first this kingdom of God, and I'm going to totally divest from capitalism in a way that looks so crazy. And part of what I'm seeing in the bubble I live in is this push to support Black businesses. And whenever I hear that push and see that push, like almost immediately, it goes from support to critique. Like, oh, well, Black businesses, they're always slow. They always catch an attitude. Like I see that and I hear that. and there's anti-blackness even when you're trying to support black businesses. That capitalist mindset of self-interest, right, just pops up and it creeps up to say, your business doesn't function like the white one down the street, therefore you don't meet my expectations, so therefore I'm going to bring my money elsewhere. That to me is a gross misunderstanding of what people are trying to do. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
I think it's the same. I'm sorry to bring this back, but I think it's the same difference, right, between Gorilla Glue, who is like got a lot of visibility for making a mistake and looking for help, versus us making a white girl famous because she cussed out her parents and said the N-word on Dr. Phil and said, "Catch me outside." How about that? Like I think that the conversation around those two individuals was very different. And I think it was because one was black and one was a black girl specifically.
Absolutely. And we know that's problematic for some people to even submit in that way. But the girl, Tessica is her name. And we're probably going to edit this part out, maybe.
And but, also, no, thank you for saying her name as well.
Yeah, Tessica is her name, and like just the constant like antagonism that she's been met with over the course of the past 2-3 days, like it's just it's boggling. I just don't understand. Like, and I tweeted earlier, and someone replied and was like, because they hate black women, and I'm like, oh, well, here we are. Thank you for making that plain for me. Thank you for making it so plain for me, because I just could not understand. And it reminds me of Beyonce in a way. People do her the same way because of her shortcomings. But I don't want to get off on the deep end about that. But people do Beyonce the same way because of her shortcomings that they feel she possesses, and they will dog her without just simply acknowledging the fact that this is a person. So it's just and like my comment section, I posted about Tessica. It was an article that Candace Bimbo wrote for Ebony, I believe it was for Ebony magazine, and I shared it on my page, and my comment section blew up with folks that just could not simply just accept. I was never advocating for anything other than being empathetic, and I'm just simply being understanding. I did, and I came for the people who I wanted to come for, because I don't do the back and forth on Facebook. But the people who I felt needed to be got together, I addressed them in the comment section. But the fact that you are sitting here, the title simply said what it said. She deserves empathy. Why is that something weird? Folks that just could not simply just accept. I was never advocating for anything other than being empathetic, and I'm just simply being understanding. I did, and I came for the people who I wanted to come for, because I don't do the back and forth on Facebook. But the people who I felt needed to be got together, I addressed them in the comment section. But the fact that you are sitting here, the title simply said what it said. She deserves empathy. Why is that something we're debating about?
It doesn't sit well with me that our culture is so quick to just check people, make fun of people to that level of, you have no idea what this young lady is going through, first of all. And even just like the Christian community or just humanity in general, like you're not promoting healing. Yeah, that whole thing to me is definitely coded in anti-blackness. Look how, unintelligent, uneducated this person is, that they thought that this glue would hold their hair down. It's like, first of all, for those talking about it, do you actually know about black hair products? Like, let's start there. Y'all probably don't know what's happening fully, but you want to give your assessment and you don't have access. Here's a rule that I live by, and I started sharing with Greg. If I do not live in that particular community or have access to that community, then I'm not licensed to actually critique that community. I'm licensed to critique the one that I'm in. I'm not licensed to critique the one I am not in. And the one I'm not in, I can only advocate for.
And advocating a lot of times just looks like shutting your behind up and amplifying their voice. Because, and I said it like in the comment section, I said, if you know, like the only stance there is to take, and I'm just like, I try to make things just very clear because I don't believe that everybody has to agree. But I do think that people ought to be truthful about what they stand in. Like if you're a racist, I think you should just go ahead and say you're a racist. This is why my respect for Trump is going to be higher than Joe Biden, because I'd rather you stand in that. Just like, you know, show us who you are. So like the only stance there is in that article was, you know, this black girl deserves empathy. Now your stance is either this black girl deserves empathy or you don't believe black girls deserve empathy, and just say that. Just say that, and that'd be that.
Yep. Just own it. Yep. Exactly. Just own it, and you know, speak it and move on, rather than trying to sit here and rationalize. She should have known better, and she should. Okay, you should have known better too when you was doing what you was doing, but yet and still, you know, then nobody dog you out. So and you don't even know, you don't know her, and she's done nothing to harm you directly or indirectly.
Recently, one of the Williams sisters, tennis player, maybe it was Venus or Serena, was in the hospital and she had blood clots, and went to the nurse and said like, got up out of her bed and said like, something's not right. I'm not feeling right. I think there's another blood clot. And the nurse was like, oh, you're fine. Like downplayed it. And it turns out that she had multiple blood clots. So right there, not believing black woman could have cost this black woman her life. And we see that in healthcare all the time. And then my mind went to when Jesus is saying these things, the Pharisees are in the background asking all these unnecessary questions that sound like, where's their insurance card? What did they do? Like our circumstances are manifested because of our like bad or sinful behavior. That's where we need to decolonize sin, which we have done. But in our gut reaction, we should never ask why somebody is in the situation they are. The only thing that matters is maybe, just maybe, God has placed you right there to be Jesus to them, and do not miss it. Do not miss somebody else's healing, because in that you are going to restore your own soul. And when you leave that person, you can say, I've interacted with an image bearer and I know God a little bit deeper, as opposed to I saw God, I wanted to help, but I just didn't, right? Or I just don't care.
I think it's a perfect example of what it looks like, what the ministry of Jesus looks like in practice versus, because I think that like this girl didn't come, like she, you know, the narrative is that she just wanted money and she wanted clout, and that's why she did what she did. When in reality, a homegirl posted a video and said, my hair is stuck. I don't know what to do. I need help. And didn't know where to. She tried calling them and they weren't helping her out. She was looking for help and nobody would help her out. And thankfully, there was actually a black surgeon that actually helped her out and was able to get the glue out of her hair. And with the statement saying that any type of substance can be broken down, which I just like, my little educator heart just bloomed from that. Just like the fact that, like, you know, one, that this black girl got the help that she needed, but also like there was a black surgeon that believed that it was possible because he believed in black women. Like he believed black women. So like, it was, my thing about that is that like in the ministry of Jesus, whenever Jesus was about to go heal somebody, the question was never, you know, what does this person need from the people that were surrounding the person. The people that were surrounding the person were the disciples, even were always asking the question, what was their sin? This person's blind. What was their sin? Well, they didn't sin. Well, what was their parents' sin? Somebody did something, you know, like to judge versus like Jesus saying, oh no, they're blind. They need help. Oh no, they're sick. They need help. They're hungry. They need help. Like not, you know, so like what does it look like for us to actually begin to treat people's needs as holy?
Come on,
sacred?
talk.
And what does it mean for us to walk in ministry in that way, where we begin to stop looking at ministry in the terms of what it looks like for us to be in a pulpit, and more so ministry into its actual definition, which is to tend to a need.
And I appreciate that thought, that perspective on holiness, because a lot of times we tie it to personal piety and we stop right there. Who am I sleeping with? If I'm cursing, if I'm drinking, it like all of that. We tie it to all of that. And honestly, if we look at the ministry of Jesus, that wasn't his top priority. that really it really wasn't. This concept of holiness, tying to personal piety, I have found that to be more of it's very individualistic, like this Western concept as it relates to Christianity. It's implicitly individualistic, and so it's not concerned about the other. It's all about me, 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 which to me ties into capitalism. It's all about me and not serving other people.
What does it look like for us to not only say that these are the things that we need, but these are the things that we need to do in order to have the things that we need? These are the things that we need to let go of in order to have the things that we need. Because one of the lies that capitalism tells us, I think this is one of the things that Jesus really pushes, is that one of the lies that capitalism tells us is that there's not enough. And that's something that we grow up to believe, that there's not enough money, there's not enough food, there's not enough resources, when like science tells us that matter cannot be created nor destroyed. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. The same matter that has existed since the beginning of time exists right now. So there's no way you can say that there's not enough of that, because all of it that's here like has not gone anywhere. So like I think that when we have to divest from that line of thinking, because that's what capitalism teaches us about, what there is, and then think beyond what there is based off of what can happen if we go about, letting go of those things that no longer serve, or that has never served us.
Yeah, scarcity is definitely a myth, and it's a consequence of supremacy culture, white supremacy, if you will. There's plenty to go around. People hoard. That's why there's not enough to go around. Something that I realized, and I was telling my dad this one night. I was like, Dad, do you know? I said Jeff Bezos could give $1 billion to every person in the world, and he would still be a billionaire.
Yep, and that goes to the conversation around billionaires.
It still come out of it. Just the fact that was insane to me. Like that was absolutely insane to me. I've seen depictions and demonstrations done with rice. Like, this amount of rice represents this much money, and these people have this much money. But for one person to literally be able to end like poverty and world hunger, that's ridiculous.
Also, in addition to that, with the rice depiction, I think there was one video of the person like literally taking of that rice and saying, this right here can end poverty and world hunger, and they won't even get that little scoop because they're not required to. And then there's also the point of like, who does that even serve? Like, it doesn't even serve Jeff Bezos to be a billionaire. So I mean, I think that also we should like really interrogate why it is that we feel the need to defend people like Jeff Bezos, in the sense of like, he's still a person, like, it's not going to harm Jeff Bezos to give up that amount of money. It's not going to harm any rich person really to for wealth to be redistributed for the masses. If anything, in capitalism, it'll help. But if anything, it'll help them as well, like them as people, like, because hoarding does not serve you. Hoarding at the expense of people suffering does not serve you. It doesn't. Like, it does nothing for you, because when you die, Like, like what? Like legit. So like none of that serves you at all.
Moth and rust. Jesus said, "Don't store." He said, "Don't store up where moth and rust can break in and destroy all of it." Think about it. It's like it's very much it's a vanity of sorts. It's just like there.
No, because there's no way to get accumulate that much money without being invested in the suffering of others.
I just it's to me it's just unethical for one person. For billionaires, just the concept of being a billionaire is flat foot unethical on its face, at its core, inherently, just all of that. It's just unethical. It's just wrong. Period.
There's a word to describe those who would, by what we define as unholy, those who seek to conserve systems, seek to conserve ways of being that do not serve others, like who seek to keep those things intact. There's a word for that. That word is idolatry. So for any Christian that might be listening to this, who has this idea that Jesus was not a color, Jesus would not go to a protest or participate in BLM, and you have an American flag at your house, and you say God bless America, and you say all these things like that, like Jesus would be apolitical, not participating in just meek and mild and like not any, like there's a word for that. It's called idolatry. You are not worshiping the God that you profess to believe in. You are worshiping other gods. You're worshiping capitalism. You're worshiping this empire, the United States. You're worshiping white supremacy and whatever other system you might find yourself attached to. Like you're worshiping that because you are serving it. And Jesus says, like, explicitly, you can't serve two masters. There's no way you can serve me, who I've defined to be the least of these. That's me. You can't serve me and then serve those things. You're going to choose. You're going to make a choice.
Which is why when Jesus said, "Choose ye this day," the concept of picking a side, people always act like Jesus was centrist. People always pretend like he didn't. Injustice is matters of justice require you to pick a side. There is no middle ground. There is no neutrality. There isn't. Period. If you're neutral, you've chosen the side of the oppressor, the side of oppression. You've chosen in that moment. If you want to be neutral and pretend like this is all just something that we need to just try to ignore or make less of.
Right. And I'm thinking, like, what does it look like for us to approach this and through the lens of transformation for everybody?
Mm-hmm. Well, gentlemen, I would love to have this conversation for hours and hours and hours, but I know we're coming to a stopping point here. And I just want to toss out one question. How have you, knowing what you know now and believe now, how have you operated differently in our capitalist society?
Just finding ways to resist capitalism, whatever it looks like. I can't articulate it really well at this time. But I know for me, something that I've always thought about is just not having everything. I'm a person who has different abilities and skills, and not feeling like everything has to be monetized. So just resisting capitalism in those small ways that affect me directly in my own personal life.
Personally, I've begun to center everything on mutual aid. On like not more so like I don't have any interest in becoming anybody's millionaire, billionaire, because I know what that could do to people. I just don't have the interest in it. I do have an interest in how can we take care of each other. I know I need to be taken care of. But I also know that I got family that need to be taken care of, and family being all of us together. Like, what does it look like for me to do that? And also I'm more, I question myself a lot, interrogate myself a lot around how my privilege shows up in different spaces. Because what I also know is that I can't just be one track about this thing, that I want to dismantle capitalism because I'm a Black person. But also knowing that like capitalism ain't going nowhere if like me as a man doesn't do the work of dismantling patriarchy as well. Me as a cisgender person doesn't do the work of dismantling transphobia. And like, you know, me being like able-bodied, me being not fat, like all these things, right? Like so like I try to I try to do a lot of questioning on myself, but like also I got told this a while ago that self-righteousness is harder to overcome than unrighteousness, and that I try to like put myself in a community of people that I could be accountable to, that can challenge me to unlearn those ways, and call me on it when those things show up. And that's a very uncomfortable thing, but I think that that's a beautiful place to be in. Paul writes that I press toward the mark, right? So I think that struggle is something that like I would encourage folks to lean into, that struggle of transforming yourself as well as the people that you're in community with, as well as being willing to be transformed in the service of the work, as Mary Hook's coin.
And I think for me, this is the next step in trying to decolonize my faith and start to really practice what I preach, right? Like Nick was saying, I can't claim myself to be against it if I'm walking in it and with it. But visually, I'm outside of it somehow. And so for me, I've never been one to be impressed by wealthy people, but I have been like, I wonder what it's like to have that amount of wealth. I just wonder what it would be like to buy a really nice home and to live a comfortable life. And for me, I'm trying to get away from that because being comfortable doesn't lead to any type of growth. Nick, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insight. I've learned a lot. I know Greg was over here with praise hands the whole time.
Thank you.
Man, what a blessing you are. And we are so thankful for your gifts, and we want to share this with you. We share it with you every week. Our main encouragement to you is that decolonization doesn't happen in a day. Peace, y'all.